My sister-in-law and I have an agreement. She watches my kids 3 days a week, and I watch hers 3 days a week. This agreement has stood since March 2020 without issues. Any changes have been discussed weeks in advance. A couple weeks ago, we had an argument. The next day, I brought my kids to her house, dropped them off, and left. I didn't speak to my sister-in-law, because when one of us is in a rush, like I was, it's standard for us to just let the kids out, stay in the car, and drive off when you see the door open. I drove to work, about 40 minutes away. When I got there, I had about 20 missed calls, and even more texts, all from my sister-in-law, all saying she didn't want to watch the kids given our argument. Her first text arrived a little before I got to her place, but I didn't see it until I got to work because my phone is always on silent when I drive. I rang her, said I'll arrange to work from home, then come get the kids. She said I have 45 minutes to get back to her place or she would call the police. I told my supervisor the situation, and she said I could leave after I did a few things. This delayed me 20 minutes. When I got back to my sister-in-law's, just over an hour later, she said she'd already called the police when the 45 minutes ran out. I then had to stick around long enough to tell the officer that I didn't abandon my children, there was just a communication issue. Sister-in-law and I had another shouting match later over this. I arranged other childcare for my kids and I've been mostly ignoring her since. However, she reached out and apologized, and has asked if I'd be willing to go back to the old childcare arrangement. I work with kids. If I got child abandonment on my record, I would never work in my field again, which she knew. And her calling the police was a massive overreaction, so if she needs a babysitter she can go whistle for all I care. She said that if I checked my phone, talked to her that morning, or came back when I was supposed to, she would not have needed to call the police, and I did this to myself. As she gave me a warning with that first text, and I could have checked my phone or spoken to her directly when I got to her place. All of which she says she would have done if she were in my position, given that we'd argued the night before. I've told her that if she thinks I'm babysitting for her, she's delusional, and she's on her own. Because of my refusal, it's looking like she may have to quit her job because my brother and her would pay more for a babysitter than they would earn from her working. My mother and brother have both called me an arsehole because there were no consequences to her calling the police, and that while she overreacted, she's apologized, so if I really forgive her, I'll let us move on. This income loss would also mean that she, my brother, and my niece and nephew might need to move somewhere cheaper. That my brother might have to take on extra hours at work. And in an extreme scenario they may even be completely unable to live independently, meaning they'd have to move in with her parents, who live several hours away. I recently won an all-expense-paid trip to Disney World for 4 nights, for myself and 3 guests. I am currently planning on bringing my boyfriend, my mother, and my boyfriend's mother. I know we all aren't exactly Disney's key demographic, but it honestly means a lot to our mothers that I am inviting them. Both my boyfriend and I grew up in poorer families that could never afford expensive vacations. And this is the first trip to Disney World for all of us. I know this is probably the only opportunity our mothers will ever have to go to Disney. And for now they are both in good enough health to still enjoy the rides. The problem is with my cousin, Jane, who has been hounding me to take her 5-year-old daughter, Kelly, instead of my boyfriend's mother. I know, what kind of monster am I for not wanting to bring a little girl to the place where dreams come true? Except Jane's family has already been to Disney World twice, most recently earlier this year in February. My cousin has done very well for herself, she runs a successful photography business, and her husband is an engineer. They are definitely able to afford their own vacations. If Jane wasn't so well off, I probably would consider taking Kelly if I thought I was giving a little kid a once-in-a-lifetime experience. But I'm not. She's already been twice and she's only 5. Our mothers have been 0 times. Jane's only rationale for wanting me to take her daughter seems to be that Disney is meant for kids. It's weird to go with only adults. And it'd be evil to not take a 5-year-old to Disney if you had the chance. There's also the issue of Kelly herself. She's not a completely terrible child, but she's whiny and throws tantrums regularly. I don't really want to spend a week with that. Also, what if she gets homesick? What if she gets actually sick? What if she gets lost? I'm not a parent myself and I would have no idea what to do in those situations. I also don't want to saddle my mother with the responsibility of caring for her. I babysat Kelly before, but only for a few hours at a time. I'm not sure why my cousin is even comfortable with the idea of me taking her child 3 states away. We are in North Carolina, so it's not like Orlando is just a short drive down the road if something happens. I tried telling Jane I'm not comfortable bringing Kelly, and she just said this is a good opportunity to find out what being a parent is like. What? She's almost acting like I'm not serious about not bringing Kelly, and I'm just pretending I don't want to bring her. It's really weird. Jane and I have always been very close, like we are sisters. And I'm afraid this has the potential to ruin our relationship once it comes to a head. What is the best way to tell her no without sounding like an evil child hater, or am I being selfish for not taking a kid to Disney? I am a 30-year-old male, and I got married 2 weeks ago. I was married before, but it ended after I found out that my older brother Thomas, 34 years old, got involved with my first wife. It was devastating because we were close and had a great relationship. I also helped him so much while he was struggling, and seeing how he repaid me hurts to this very day. I stopped talking to him and Mom and Dad forced me to keep it a secret, and because I was too weak to argue with them, I just kept my own distance. Then I met my now wife. My family loved and embraced her as their own. Mom and Dad treat her like a queen, which helped repair and solidified my relationship with them. However, as the wedding was approaching, they told me they expected me to invite Thomas. I of course refused, but they kept guilting me about what the relatives and other guests would think and say when they don't see Thomas there. I fought with them about it till the day of the wedding. Turned out they'd invited him behind my back, but I found out and stopped them in time. They came to the wedding looking pissed, asking what we were going to tell people when they ask about Thomas. I told them I'd take care of it. And what I did was take a moment while everyone was paying attention, grabbed the mic and flat out announced this and said, "The reason I didn't invite Thomas to my wedding is because I was worried he'd steal my now wife just like he stole the first one." I said it playfully to not make it sound so tense, but most of the guests looked shocked and started mumbling. Then it went awkwardly quiet for a moment. Then we moved on, but I saw Mom and Dad walk out while looking at me grudgingly. Later they started lashing out about how I just exposed Thomas and caused him to be shunned by the family in the most hideous of ways. I told them that I already said I didn't want him there, yet they tried to push him on me repeatedly, saying, "What are people going to say?" So I told them the reason why he wasn't there in a playful way, but they, the guests, still got the message. Mom started yelling about how everyone will now look down on and shun Thomas. She called me pathetic and cruel for still punishing him and gradually ruining his life despite him apologizing and trying to reconcile. But in my opinion, some things are just unforgivable. We've been on horrible terms since then. My wife said at least now they're off my back about what people would say about not inviting him. About a week after my post, I planted a wall of blackberries and raspberries at the 2 sides of my garden facing the driveway, about 30 centimeters from the edge, so no overhanging branches. On the other side of the berry wall, I planted lots stuff like strawberries and tomatoes. To reach the tomatoes and strawberries from the driveway, you have either go through the fruit bushes or walk up to my house. Walk about 2 along the side of the house and my windows, and then walk into my actual garden. Not something you do by mistake. For about 2 weeks it was somewhat quiet, but I still found the kids on my driveway every single days. As far as I know, they did not enter the garden, and I hadn't noticed them walking around my house anymore. So I figured the bushes were working. About 1 week ago, berry season started and my bushes are now full of raspberries, and there's lots of strawberries as well. The neighbors noticed. First I caught the boys picking and eating raspberries, so I told them off and dropped them off at home, told their mom I caught them stealing. That's how I see it, even though it's fruit, and that I'd call the cops next time. She huffed and told me to grow up, but took the boys inside anyway. After that it was quiet up until yesterday afternoon, when I went out for a while and found the dad and his 2 sons right in the middle of my garden when I returned, clearing my bushes and plants. I didn't even confront them, just called the cops from a distance as they hadn't noticed me yet and started filming them after making the call. Luckily 2 cops showed up after 10 minutes or so, and they confronted the neighbor as they were still picking berries. They told them they were trespassing and that the berry picking was in fact considered stealing and that I could press charges. For the first time I noticed a bit of fear in my neighbor. He was having trouble finding his words and kept looking back at his house. I guess hoping his wife would show to yell at the cops. They all went inside with the cops, so I just went home as well. After a while the cops came by and asked me if I wanted to press charges. I asked them if they felt like they scared the neighbor enough to stay away. I got a small smile and yes, about him, but the wife had just kept shouting at them and her husband about the little. Living next door. I told them no for now, asked them if I'd be allowed to get an extra camera set up on the wall between my garden and the road, to cover the entire front garden plus driveway. They said that's allowed as long as it's on my side of the wall. So, now I'm getting an extra camera installed. One neighbor knows I'm done messing around, but his wife isn't there yet, and if I ever catch any of them again, the cops will be called and possible charges will follow.